They would later remember it as the Pact of the Saffron Stars, a last-chance truce hammered out after generations of bloodshed between the Terran, Union, and the vast Archaeid Dominion. Its price seemed deceptively small. One human commander would marry the daughter of the Dominion's supreme ruler, creating a fragile bridge between two worlds that had known nothing but hatred. What no one foresaw was that Commander Jace Halden, a man shaped by war and duty, would meet a bride his enemies dismissed as flawed, a woman whose quiet strength might just be enough to mend wounds carved across a galaxy. The capital of the Archaeid Dominion rose before him, a city of crystalline towers that sliced through the golden atmosphere. Like shards of frozen dawn, their mirrored surfaces bent the light of 3 distant suns into rivers of color that danced across the labyrinth of bridges and walkways below. But inside the onyx-ribbed halls of the Dominion Citadel, beauty could not hide the bitterness clinging to every corner. The air itself tasted like resignation. Commander Jace Halden stood alone in the ceremonial rotunda, his formal blacks feeling heavier than combat armor, because armor couldn't protect him from this. High above, the vaulted ceiling vibrated with harmonic tones, the Archaeadian version of wedding hymns. To human ears, it sounded haunting, almost mournful, a dirge dressed in elegance. Around him, representatives from 2 civilizations observed the proceedings with tight jaws and colder hearts. Humans and Archaeadians alike had sacrificed too much to view this union as anything but a political surrender. The copper-skinned Archaeadians murmured in their lilting tritone language, while the human officers maintained the rigid stillness of soldiers awaiting judgment. At the far end, High Sovereign Mailer sat upon a throne grown from living crystal, his expression a mixture of pride eroded by necessity. The treaty had extracted more than territory or military concessions. It demanded his only child. The bride approaches, intoned the herald, his translation echoing through embedded resonance panels. Jace straightened as the grand doors parted with a deep grinding rumble. He had studied Archaeadian customs, physiology, and etiquette. He thought he was prepared. He wasn't. Princess Serenia Mailer entered like a storm wrapped in silk. Where Archaeadian nobles typically possessed a reed-thin elegance, Serenia walked with grounded certainty, her presence filling the chamber as surely as the warm glow of the suns behind her. Her skin, a deep sapphire unique among her people, contrasted sharply with her father's burnished copper. Intricate strands of luminous filaments, Archaeadian, solar threads, wove through her pale silver hair, catching the chamber's light in shimmering pulses. But it was her size that drew every stare. Among a species that worshipped ethereal stillness and narrow frames, Serenia's fuller form was considered a flaw, an aesthetic imperfection that court whispers treated like a scandal. Her own people watched her arrival with veiled disdain. Several humans exchanged looks that made Jace's stomach tighten with anger. War had scarred their civilizations enough. Did cruelty have to finish the job? As she moved closer, he saw the mask she wore, a brittle shield of dignity forged over years of quiet wounds. Yet behind her violet silver eyes flickered something fierce. Not pride, not arrogance, defiance. There was more to her than anyone had ever cared to see. When she stepped into the glowing ceremonial circle before him, Serenia lifted her gaze. Their eyes met, 2 strangers bound by politics, standing on the edge of a future neither had chosen. And in that moment, Jace didn't see a treaty token. He saw a woman holding herself together with quiet, breathtaking strength. "Commander Halden," she said in smooth, flawless Terran standard. Her voice carried the timbre of instruments no human orchestra had ever built. "I am Princess Serenia of the Mailer line." Her introduction echoed through the rotunda, final and unyielding. The first words of a partnership that would shape the fate of 2 worlds. "The Pact of the Saffron Stars," Serenia finished softly. "It seems today we become husband and wife." Her bluntness startled Jace more than any battlefield surprise ever had. No trembling shyness, no ceremonial recitation, just a clear-eyed recognition of the political machinery grinding both of them forward. He bowed with formal precision. "Your Highness, the privilege is mine." A humorless breath escaped her, almost a laugh but stripped of warmth. "Privilege? Commander, let's not pretend this is anything more than a treaty wrapped in lace, a performance crafted to soothe the egos of 2 wounded civilizations." The witnesses expected stiff greetings and awkward small talk, but something unexpected, something dangerous began to crackle. In the air between the human commander, and the Dominion princess, a spark neither of them had planned for. The ceremony unfolded with the cold efficiency of a diplomatic signing. Arcadian rites intertwined awkwardly with Terran protocols, satisfying no one, even as the final vows bound their futures in the name of peace. When the rituals ended and guests began drifting toward the reception platforms, an imposing figure stepped into their path. Marshal Draven, decorated war hero of the Dominion, wore the tight smile of a man who savored discomfort, but only when it belonged to others. "Well now, Commander Halden," Draven purred, his translated voice oozing courtesy like oil over rust. "I trust you find your new bride acceptable. Humans, after all, hold such curious ideas about what is pleasing to the eye. A perfect strike. Honed to stab, yet polished enough to deny offense." Several Dominion officers chuckled. Human diplomats shifted as if swallowing something sour. Beside him, Serenya's posture held steady. But Jace saw the small, painful tremor she tried to bury, the echo of a lifetime spent weathering such barbed observations. "Beauty is a matter of perception, Marshal," Jace replied evenly. "Though it's usually those, with the least of it, inside or out, who feel compelled to comment on others." Silence fell like a dropped blade. Draven's copper skin flushed dark with barely contained fury. "You dare!" But Jace continued as if the man's outrage were nothing more than background static. "Princess Serenya carries herself with more dignity and courage than I've witnessed in any war chamber or council hall," he said, his voice carrying across the stunned crowd. "If that unsettles you, Marshal, then perhaps the flaw lies not with her, but with your own insecurities." Several humans nodded, grim satisfaction in their eyes. Dominion nobles stared as though they'd witnessed an unforgivable blasphemy. No one had anticipated the human groom openly defending a bride many considered an embarrassment. Draven's hand slid toward the ceremonial blade on his hip. "Remember where you stand, human. This is our world. Your species hardly understands the first thing about Archaeadian measures of worth." "Then perhaps," Serenya said quietly, stepping forward with a grace that made her silken braids shimmer, "you would be so kind as to enlighten my husband about these measures you value so highly." Jace watched something flicker across Draven's expression, recognition of the trap she'd set. Any definition he offered would either reveal his cruelty or bind him to standards he assumed the human could never meet. The Marshal recovered quickly. "Very well," Draven said, lips curling in triumph. "Among the Dominion worth is proven through the trials of mind, spirit, and strength. Perhaps your new husband would care to demonstrate his merit." A ripple of electric anticipation passed through the crowd. A cunning move, force the human into a public contest. He would almost certainly fail, thereby validating Draven's contempt and making Serenya appear even weaker by association. Jace turned to his bride, seeing hope or fear shimmer just beneath her calm exterior. And in that moment he made a choice even he hadn't expected. "I accept," he said. The room gasped. "What trials did you have in mind, Marshal?" No one, absolutely no one, believed the human would dare attempt such a challenge. No one spoke. Jace's acceptance hit the hall like a thunderclap muffled by stone, the kind of silence that comes before something monumental cracks open. Marshal Draven's predatory grin widened, sharp as a blade honed for ceremony yet eager for blood. With a sweeping gesture, he directed the gathering toward the Dominion's fabled sanctum of measures, a vast proving chamber where Archaeadian nobles had demonstrated worthiness for thousands of years. "The first measure," Draven announced, projecting smug triumph to the spectators. Trailing behind is understanding. "You must showcase mastery of Dominion chronicles, philosophy, lineage, and cultural strata." Most citizens spend decades preparing for these examinations. They move through towering corridors carved from living crystal, corridors that seem to hum with the ghosts of past contenders. The crowd followed like witnesses to a slow, inevitable execution. Jace walked beside Serenya, her expression guarded behind the same mask she had worn her entire life. "You are not required to agree to this," she murmured, her voice barely audible above the echo of their steps. "Draven designs his trials to wound. He intends to break you, publicly." "Maybe," Jace said, his tone steady. "But he miscalculated one thing." She glanced up, wary. "And what mistake would that be?" "He insulted my wife." The words came out quietly, but with a conviction that startled both of them. He continued, softer now. "Whatever politics put us here, You don't deserve to be treated like a burden or a bargaining chip. For a moment her steps faltered. She studied him as though seeing him clearly for the first time. You understand this will not win you any favor, she said. Terrans see our marriage as a necessary sacrifice, and my people… She exhaled slowly. You've witnessed their opinion of me. Then they're fools. Jace didn't sugarcoat it. In my experience, the people dismissed first are often the ones who carry the most unseen strength. Something shifted behind her violet-silver eyes, a hairline crack in her carefully constructed armor, and beneath that fracture, warmth, hope, a glimmer of belief she had buried long ago. They stepped into the sanctum of measures, an enormous chamber whose walls rippled with holographic renderings of Arcadian history, ancient wars, founding philosophies, scientific breakthroughs, and cultural epics folded through the air like living auroras. Begin, Draven commanded. The trial systems awakened with a resonant hum. You have 1 cycle hour, he declared. The interface will question you on increasingly complex subjects until you fail. Even privileged Dominion scholars rarely surpass intermediate tiers. Jace approached the central platform, a crystalline disk surrounded by floating data streams, and then, to the astonishment of everyone present, he turned toward Serenia. Will you help me, he asked. No flourish. No manipulation. Just simple honesty. This is your heritage, he said. Your knowledge. I would be honored to learn with you beside me. A shockwave of whispers burst through the hall. Never, not once in the history of the measures, had anyone asked for aid. Assistance was considered weakness and admission of inadequacy. Yet Jace's request did not sound like submission. It sounded like partnership. Draven stepped forward sharply. These measures are individual trials. Outside aid is forbidden. Is it? Serenia asked. She moved to Jace's side with fluid confidence, her tone calm but carrying enough authority to halt the marshal in place. Show me the precise clause that prohibits collaboration. During the measure of understanding. Draven blinked, caught mid-bluster. Jace recognized the strategy instantly. Serenia was maneuvering, him with expert familiarity, using the Dominion's own labyrinthine customs against him. The measure of understanding, she continued, voice smooth as polished stone, was created to assess one's comprehension of our civilization's depth. What could demonstrate greater cultural comprehension than forming alliances, or seeking insight from those more knowledgeable? Murmurs rippled through the spectators, curiosity, admiration, disbelief. Draven's expression soured as the trap closed around him. To forbid cooperation would imply that Dominion culture valued ignorant stubbornness over enlightened unity. To permit it meant granting the human an unexpected and potentially dangerous advantage. Finally, through clenched teeth, he conceded, Very well. Let us see how far unity can truly reach, Draven finished bitterly. As Jace and Serenia stepped toward the radiant interface, their fingers brushed when they reached for the same control node. It was a fleeting touch, barely a whisper of contact, but something surged between them. Not romantic, not physical, something older, something that recognized potential in the other, like two halves of a mechanism that had never functioned properly until now, and what unfolded next shattered every expectation in the sanctum. Their minds did not simply cooperate, they interlocked. Jace's battle-honed analytical instincts meshed flawlessly with Serenia's deep-rooted cultural intuition. The interface presented increasingly intricate challenges, historical conflicts requiring moral analysis, philosophical paradoxes dating back millennia, technological riddles meant to test both innovation and precision. Where Jace dissected patterns with surgical clarity, Serenia supplied context, songs, myths, hidden meaning woven through centuries of Arcadian thought. Where she introduced intuition, he gave it structure. It was not human thinking. It was not Dominion thinking. It was something new, something the observers had never witnessed. Remarkable, breathed Scholar Aritha Morn, the palace's chief archivist. They're not merely answering. They're synthesizing entirely new frameworks, hybrid, reasoning neither species has ever documented. Draven's confidence soured into dread as the pair rose through tears most. Dominion scholars never touched. His carefully laid plan was dissolving. Worse, they were enjoying themselves. Then the interface pulsed with deep violet light. Paradox of the echoing lens. A challenge that had defeated generations of philosophers. Vast holographic mirrors exploded across the chamber, each reflection birthing another. Endless worlds looping into infinity. Every perspective contradicted another. Every answer erased itself. The question, how does one find truth when every perspective only reveals another distorted reflection? Jace frowned, studying the infinite regress. It was a trap designed to swallow logic whole, but Serenya's eyes lit with wonder. It's exquisite, she whispered, her fingers sweeping through the luminous layers. She glanced at Jace. Do you see what it's assuming? That truth is singular, he answered slowly. That one mirror must be correct and the others must be false. Exactly. Her smile widened with genuine joy, something few in the room had ever seen from her. But what if truth isn't one image? What if it's the harmony of them all? Realization dawned across Jace's expression. Then the reflections aren't the barrier. They are the truth. Reality too vast to be captured from any single angle. Together they crafted an answer that reframed the paradox entirely. They didn't search for the right mirror. They defined truth as the collective resonance between every perspective. AI, living dialogue instead of a solitary revelation. The interface responded with a crystalline harmonic so pure that several Dominion nobles gasped aloud, a harmonic reserved only for answers that expand the philosophical canon itself. Draven staggered forward. Impossible. That paradox wasn't meant to be solved. It exists to illustrate the futility of absolute reasoning. Perhaps, Serenia said softly, shoulders brushing Jace's. The futility came from insisting it must be solved in isolation. From his throne, High Sovereign Mailer leaned forward for the first time that evening. His eyes, old, tired, and hardened by decades of war, softened. A glimmer of something long buried rose within them. It looked like pride. The interface dimmed, then flared once more. The final challenge. Not a puzzle. A declaration. A single prompt. To find the greatest strength of Archaeadian civilization. Jace understood instantly. A trap. Any answer glorifying Dominion superiority could be used to undermine the treaty, or justify renewed conflict. But rejecting Dominion virtues outright would insult Serena's people and perhaps doom her standing forever. He inhaled slowly, preparing to speak. But then, he felt Serena's hand graze his. A silent question, a quiet plea for partnership, and he knew the next words had to come from both of them. When Jace looked toward Serena, a quiet understanding moved between them, an unspoken recognition, as if they were sharing a truth only they could hear. The greatest strength of the Arcade Dominion, Serena said softly, her voice steady as her fingers intertwined with Jace's, is its ability to evolve by embracing what lies beyond itself. True wisdom isn't born from isolation, but from the harmony created when different minds, different histories, and different hearts choose to learn from one another. Their voices blended on the final words, a unified declaration that drifted through the amphitheater like a challenge to centuries of ingrained belief. It wasn't merely an answer. It was a redefinition, an assertion that strength came not from dominance, but from connection. For a long moment, nothing moved. The Arcadian crowd stared at the pair in stunned silence. They hadn't just completed the knowledge trial, they had changed its meaning. They had shown what two cultures could become together, something neither civilization had ever imagined possible on its own. The triumph wiped the smugness clean off Marshal Draven's face. But though his confidence cracked, his determination did not. If anything, his resentment sharpened. The trial of intellect was over, yet he was far from finished with his plan to break the human newcomer. The gathering shifted into the Hall of Echoes, where the second ordeal awaited, the trial of spirit. A test not of knowledge, but of inner truth, emotional courage, moral depth, and the integrity to confront one's deepest shadows. The spirit trial, Draven announced, voice tight and brittle, reveals the fears and failings we try hardest to bury. Many Archaeadian adults refuse to attempt this challenge, because it demands total transparency of the soul. Jace noticed Serena stiffen at that. Her fingers brushed the hem of her ceremonial mantle, a small gesture that betrayed a lifetime spent. Under the weight of quiet wounds, years of hearing, she was insufficient, unworthy, a disappointment to a legacy she never asked to uphold. The chamber itself was a masterpiece of Arcadian engineering. Arching pillars, walls studded with crystalline, nodes capable of projecting emotional states into shared illusions. Nothing hidden, nothing protected. Every witness would see the truth exactly as the participant felt it. "I'll go first," Jace said before Serenia could speak, stepping toward the central dais with steady resolve. The moment he entered the field, the resonance stones activated. Light swirled around him, pulling threads of memory and emotion into luminous shapes. The spectators inhaled sharply as Jace's inner life unfolded around them. Images from his early years appeared. First, his childhood on the Agrarian plains of Terra Nova. They saw a boy who learned the value of grit and loyalty, who helped his family endure storms and droughts, who grew up believing character mattered more than status or appearance. They felt his pride when he enlisted in the Vanguard Corps, the swell of purpose that filled him when he vowed to protect his people. Then came the war. The battlefield at the Rimward. Expanse materialized in terrifying clarity, haze. From ruptured atmospheres, the thunder of ion detonations, the frantic calculations that determined who lived and who died. But the violence wasn't what held the crowd spellbound. It was Jace's sorrow. They felt the weight in his chest every time an order he gave cost both human and Archaeadian lives. They felt the sleepless nights spent wondering whether peace had been possible sooner, if he had failed to see what lay beyond his own limited viewpoint, and most jarring of all, he had respected Archaeadian strategy even while fighting against it. "I joined the Vanguard to shield others," Jace said, his voice echoing through a chamber that pulsed with his memories. "But every soldier I stopped was someone else's son, someone else's cherished hope. The hardest part wasn't risking my own life. It was living with the knowledge that every victory carved a hole in another family's world." The projection shifted again, revealing his private thoughts. During the peace accords, relief at the end of bloodshed mixed with dread, about the sacrifices still ahead. The audience braced for bitterness when the illusion displayed the announcement of the interspecies marriage mandate, but instead they saw curiosity, concern, compassion, not revulsion toward Serenia, not resentment toward the Archaeadians, but an honest desire to understand who she was, what she felt, and how they could navigate this unwanted destiny together with dignity. "My greatest fear," Jace said, the words trembling with painful sincerity, "isn't dying in battle or failing at diplomacy. It's becoming the kind of man who stops seeing others as human or Archaeadian or anything worth caring about. A man who chooses convenience over conscience." His voice faded, but the chamber still glowed with the raw, open truth of him, his guilt, his hope, his humility, and the stubborn compassion that guided him despite everything he'd endured. The crowd stood frozen, unable to look away. The trial had only begun. Yet already Jace had changed the room. The resonance pillars pulsed softly, registering the unmistakable authenticity of Jace's confession. This wasn't theatrics. This was a man carving open the truth of himself for all to see. Marshal Draven shifted uneasily, jaw tightening as he realized. Yet again, the trial was slipping out of his control. But the room's attention snapped toward a new vision when the projections revealed Jace's first glimpse of Serenia inside the ceremonial hall. The spectators braced for disgust or reluctant duty. Instead, they felt his fury, sharp, protective fury, at the callous remarks aimed at her. His awe at her composure as she endured insults polished by etiquette. And beneath it all, something that made the nearest Archaeadian nobles inhale sharply. Desire, not born from superficial beauty but from the quiet strength she carried, from the intelligence in her gaze, from a bravery honed by years of being underestimated. In the short hours since their meeting, Jace's heart had already begun to gravitate toward hers. Not out of obligation, but out of choice. "The spirit trial is complete," the interface declared. As the flood of his memories faded into shimmering dust, Serenia stared at him, eyes bright, lips parted, with something almost luminous. Wonder, yes, but deeper than that, gratitude. For the first time, someone had seen her not as a political footnote, not as a burden, but as a woman deserving admiration and affection. "Your turn," Draven snapped, bitterness leaking through his voice. He clearly expected her internal world to expose shame, weakness, anything he could weaponize. But when Serenia stepped forward, the lingering glow from Jace's trial seemed to cling to her, as if the chamber itself sensed the shift in her spirit. She glanced back at Jace, and in that brief moment, she no longer seemed small or overlooked. She had an ally now, a partner. The neural lattice awakened, crystals blooming with a gentle, cerulean hue, an emotional spectrum, reserved for profound introspection. The Arcadian crowd braced for predictable frailty. They were not prepared for what unfolded. A breathtaking tapestry of color and memory surrounded them. A young Sirenia raced through the shimmering prism gardens of the palace, delighting in patterns older nobles ignored. She asked questions her tutors couldn't answer, fusing ancient artistic techniques with daring innovations that horrified the traditionalists. They felt her mind, a luminous, intricate architecture of intuition and creativity that none of her critics had ever bothered to look for. I was 7 when I realized Father's advisors used different voices with me than with my brothers, her echoing narration murmured. Their words were kind, but their eyes told another story. The projection rippled into her adolescent years, whispers behind fans, expectations sharpened into quiet knives, the slow erosion of confidence as she was told, again and again, that she did not fit the mold crafted for her. But the greatest shock wasn't her suffering. It was her answer to it. Where bitterness might have grown, she chose compassion. Instead of retreating inward, she slipped into the palace's forgotten passageways, teaching servant children to read, funneling resources to border refugees, stepping in to stop small injustices, always unnoticed, always careful. My stature became my camouflage. Her voice continued. As the scene shifted to noble gatherings where she moved like a shadow, to them I was an afterthought. But when people refuse to see you, they never notice the good you're doing right in front of them. The crowd fell utterly silent. Beneath her unassuming presence lay a well of resilience, empathy, and quiet rebellion far deeper than anyone imagined. Even Sirenia seemed stunned. The memories played back with such clarity that she was seeing her own life as though for the first time, realizing the strength she'd carried all along. And then it came something no one expected, not from the projections, not from the technology, but from Jace himself. As the final echoes of her inner world faded, Jace spoke a single name into the air, a name tied to the deepest buried truth of Sirenia's past, a name that froze the entire chamber, a name that made High Sovereign Mailer surge from his throne in absolute shock. And in that suspended heartbeat, everything changed. Marshal Draven stiffened as the chamber continued to broadcast memories he had never intended anyone to see. Little flashes of his own cruelty, moments when he'd belittled junior officers or crushed the spirits of those beneath him. Sirenia had witnessed many of those moments, the interface revealed, and without seeking recognition, she had quietly stepped in afterward, mending the damage he left behind. Several nobles shifted uncomfortably as their own behavior flickered across her recollections. The truth was unflattering, and for the first time, many saw themselves through the eyes of someone they dismissed as insignificant. But the revelations that followed struck deeper than any of them expected. When the neural lattice reached the part of her mind that held thoughts of the political marriage, the room braced for disgust, resentment, or hopeless resignation. Instead, they felt something astonishing. Hope. I had long accepted that love was not meant for me. Sirenia's voice echoed across the silent chamber. I believed my life would be spent as an obligation to be endured, a mistake politely ignored. But when Commander Halden looked at me, truly looked, I saw myself reflected in someone else's eyes as someone who mattered. The images shifted into scenes of her secret studies, scrolls of human philosophy, military histories, cultural analyses. She had studied Jace's people not out of duty, but because she wanted to understand the man she might stand beside. While the Arcadian court saw the bond as a degrading necessity, Sirenia had begun to perceive the possibility of something more. A bridge, a partnership built on cooperation rather than hierarchy. And then the chamber revealed her thoughts about Jace himself. The crowd inhaled sharply as they felt the warmth she carried for him, her admiration for his unshakable sense of honor, his instinct to shield others, his refusal to bend even under prejudice. In only a few hours, she had begun to feel genuine affection for the human who treated her as an equal, as someone worthy of respect and tenderness. My deepest shame, she continued, voice trembling but unbroken, was believing my value depended on the approval of those who refused to see me. My greatest fear is that I might teach someone else that same lie, that I might help diminish another soul the way I allowed myself to be diminished. The lattice flared brightly, confirming her total honesty. But beneath that truth, it uncovered something more, something that made High Sovereign Mailer rise from his throne in awe. Her mind was a hidden world of intricate strategy, social analysis, and political insight. She understood the flow of influence, the undercurrents of power, the subtle fractures in the court structure. She had hidden that brilliance for years, shrinking herself to avoid alarming those who resented intelligence they could not control. As the final images dissolved into shimmering dust, Serena and Jace stepped toward one another without hesitation. Their hands found each other as though guided by something older than either. Culture, two lives rising into alignment. The nobles, warriors, and advisors who had gathered stared at them in stunned quiet. For the first time, they understood how catastrophically wrong they had all been. Strength was not cruelty and weakness was not kindness. What stood before them was a unity neither species had expected, harmony dangerous to every old prejudice. The spirit trial is concluded, the interface announced. Both candidates exhibit exceptional emotional integrity and moral balance. Marshal Draven's expression twisted with helpless fury. He had planned to expose the human as unworthy and crown the princess as unfit. Instead, the trial had revealed them as exactly the kind of leaders both worlds lacked. One challenge remains, he growled. The trial of valor, a test of physical courage. The human will not endure true Arcadian combat. But as Jace and Serena exchanged a single look, steady, united, every witness felt the same thing. They were no longer two individuals. They were a force, and no one in that hall would ever risk mocking the princess again, because they finally understood what they had seen. Not humiliation, not weakness, but the rising dawn of two extraordinary souls choosing one, another in defiance of everything their societies had taught them. 6 months after the marriage meant to cement a fragile peace, the crystalline towers of the Arcadian capital resonated with a new harmony. Song whines swept across the air, lavender horizon as Jace and Serena stood, together on the balcony of their shared living quarters, watching the alien sunrise paint, shifting gemstones across the sky. The trial of valor had never happened. After witnessing their unity in mind and spirit, High Sovereign Mailer declared the tests complete, and in a move that shocked every level of the court, he formally announced Serena as his chosen successor. The nobles who once sneered at her now bowed in her direction. Those who ignored her now sought her counsel. Her world had changed, and she had changed it. The old advisors, once so quick to whisper doubts about her worth, now sought her guidance with a humility none of them would have shown a year ago. They had finally realized that her unconventional way of seeing the world was not a flaw, but the very perspective their stagnant empire needed to evolve past its rigid traditions. The Terran envoy touched down an hour ago, Serena murmured, her fingers interlaced with Jace's as the morning light spilled across the balcony. Sleek diplomatic crafts descended through the gold-lit haze, their hulls catching the shimmer of the capital's crystalline towers. Envoy Marlowe looked genuinely startled to see you. Happy. Jace chuckled and tightened his arm around her waist. Months of shared leadership, shared burdens and shared tenderness, had coaxed a new radiance out of Serena, one that the court had slowly begun to recognize as strength, rather than fragility. Even the fashion of the highborn had shifted, with designers abandoning ancient beauty codes and embracing more expressive, inclusive forms. He told me he expected to find me pacing the halls, counting down the days until Earth took me back, Jace admitted. I don't think he ever imagined I'd find anything here worth staying for. Anything? Serena teased, arching a brow in mock offense. Jace gently touched his forehead to hers. Someone, he corrected softly. Someone who showed me just how breathtaking the universe can be. Their partnership had become bigger than themselves. The unity and transparency they'd shown during the trials had ignited a wave of cooperative projects across both civilizations, research teams, merchant guilds, even cultural performance. Exchanges, doors once sealed shut by suspicion, had begun opening everywhere. Where distrust had lived, curiosity now took root. The Convergence Council has summoned us next cycle, Serena said, activating a floating data scroll encoded in both Terran glyphs and Arcadian tonal sigils. They want us to present our method for cross-species collaboration. They're hoping it can become a model for future diplomacy. Jace studied the hologram, thoughtful. Do you think it'll hold up under scrutiny? What we've built here, can it survive being dissected by committees and rulebooks? Serenia was silent for a long moment, the rising sun casting violet warmth across her features. What we've built, she said finally, isn't a treaty or a strategy. It's the decision to treat every being as whole, complex and deserving of compassion. You can't codify that. It has to be chosen again and again by individuals. A soft chime rippled through their quarters. A hologram flickered to life, revealing Princess Sarah, Serenia's energetic younger sister, nearly vibrating with excitement. Sister, you both need to see the latest reports from the frontier sectors, Sarah announced. 3 more interspecies unions were formalized this week. Administrators are requesting guidance on shared culture families, child rearing, blended traditions, partnership laws. It's spreading. Jace watched Serenia's expression brighten with pure, unfiltered joy. So the idea's taking root, he murmured. That bonds can be formed across the boundaries we once insisted were unbreakable. Like ripples across stardust, Serenia agreed. Every time someone chooses connection over fear, the universe grows a little wider. As they prepared for another day of delicate political sessions and bridge-building negotiations, Jace found himself marveling at how far he'd come. Half a year earlier, he'd been a weary soldier consenting to a marriage, forged out of political necessity. Now he was living proof that strength came not from dominance, but from the vulnerability required to embrace love in unfamiliar forms. Their final visitor that morning arrived with stiff posture and a face carved from barely concealed resentment. High Marshal Draven, the architect of the trials, Jace had been expected to fail, bowed with forced precision. Your Highnesses, he said, voice taut, the High Sovereign sends word that the revised alliance accords have been ratified by both governments. The partnership between our peoples is no longer provisional, it is enduring, bound not by deterrence but by shared promise. As the Marshal retreated, clearly uneasy, carrying news that contradicted everything he had once championed, Serenia and Jace exchanged a quiet, knowing look. They had not simply passed the tests designed to break them. They had reshaped the very definition of worth. In a galaxy long convinced that difference required division, the courage of a single couple had shown another path, that harmony was not naive, nor impossible, but the natural outcome of choosing empathy over fear. Their union had begun as a mandate of peace, but it had grown into something infinitely more powerful, a living testament that the heart's boundaries were the only limits that ever truly mattered. And in the crystalline gardens below, where children of a dozen species played beneath skies painted in impossible colors, the future they were shaping continued to unfurl, vibrant, unpredictable, and filled with possibilities as endless as the constellations above.